Hi, this is Tami Lysher, host of Embracing Change, Talking Through Trauma. The podcast is focused on fitness enthusiasts and movement educators, where we'll have deep conversations that are impacting the movement industry. For example, trauma, health, vitality, the nervous system, and movement. And now, welcome to the podcast. Good morning, good day, and welcome to Embracing Change, Talking Through Trauma. And today my guest is, her name is Kasia Derbyszewska, and Kasia actually resides somewhere in Indiana, but we're virtual. And she is bringing to the table today a past history of working with high school students. She also left high school working with the students, and she went on to the Harvard and got a degree in neuroscience. And she now is a public speaker, an author, and she has a business with her husband, Matt, and it's called Learning Key Works. Welcome, Kasia.
Thank you so much, Tami. So excited and honored to be here with you to talk about these important topics today.
So my work originally with Kasia was around curriculum design, which is also something that she is very much an expert at. But she uses something called universal design. And so when we first began our conversation, looking at the framework for universal design, there's nowhere in it where it talks about the nervous system. So we're just going to kind of dive right in. So can you tell our listeners, what is universal design?
Yes. So universal design for learning is a framework that helps us understand what we call predictable variability. So a lot of times when we think about how people differ, we think about them in terms of developmental differences. Or so you have somebody who is 5 years old or 10 years old or 30 or 50. But there are other dimensions of variability that are equally important and are also predictable. So if we know, if we can predict how people differ in very systematic ways, then we can design flexible and adaptive learning environments that really support the learner where they are at. And so that, in a nutshell, is universal design for learning. And we look at 3 brain networks: how people engage with their environments and information, how do people recognize it, and then how do people act on and express what they know based off of how they are sensing and feeling and perceiving that environment.
That's a really very concise way. One of the things that it does talk about is biases and how we handle biases in regards to the sense of feeling safety. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. So the guidelines, so if our listeners are familiar with the UDL guidelines, and some of us may be new to them and some of us may have a larger background, these UDL guidelines, which are internationally recognized as a way of anticipating this variability, were just re-released a few weeks ago. And one of the main differences that really comes with this updated change is that we are really thinking about not only this sense of agency and how do we have this sense of autonomy, but how are we in the way that we speak, the way that we engage or design our environments? How do we address biases and create feelings of safety for people so that people can feel a sense of belonging, a sense of community, and a sense of not only individual, but also collective reflection that also then ends up inevitably leading to joy and resiliency. So there's a lot we could unpack there. But those are some of those main key ideas that the new UDL guidelines, this latest brain research is really pointing to, that we need to develop this sense of agency so people can authentically show up as who they are in whatever learning environment that they are in.
I love that. And there's a saying that you talk about, and you say if there's issues, it's the issues with the curriculum, not around, or it's issues with the design, I guess is what I should say.
Right. So the barrier is never in the learner. It's always in the design. People
Yeah.
are variable. And that, when we think about in terms of trauma, or when we think about nervous system regulation, people are variable on those dimensions as well. So the problem is never with the person, but it's always in the design and how we approach a human being. How do we create an environment, regardless of the environment that you are in, whether it's an online course, whether it's in your home environment, whether it is on a stage, whether it's at a church. It doesn't matter what the environment is. People show up as who they are, having experienced what they have, but then understanding that, how do we design flexible and adaptive environments to create a sense of safety, to create a sense of belonging for them?
I think that is so critically important. And it's been something that I have really held on to in incorporating it into like the classes that I've created both in person and online. And the sense of safety is so critically important for our nervous system and how it looks at, do I feel safe in this environment? It's not necessarily, I mean, we try to create, but we have to create an environment where everybody's going to feel safe.
Yes. And so I think that, it's important for people to understand, what does safety look like? Can I
Mm-hmm.
show up as my own authentic self? Do I feel that my voice is heard? So it's not enough just to have a seat at the table, but are people waiting for me to express, or creating the space for me to express myself? Are they inviting me? Are the materials that we're using, do they represent me? So this concept of windows and mirrors, like, do I see other people? Are the things that I'm exposed to, are they windows into other people, but also mirrors and reflection of myself? And
Yeah.
these little things can create that sense of safety and trust.
Yeah. That's so important, especially the piece about voice and choice, because, and you've heard me say this many times, but trauma stifles our voice and our choice and our agency. And so when you think about like from a trauma informed perspective, that to me like segues right into like like encouraging people to stand up and have a voice in whatever subject matter they're talking about.
That is absolutely so true. So, and I love that your main theme is voice and choice, because when we feel that our voice matters, when we feel that we have some choices and that we're not stuck, now we have agency.
Yeah.
And when we have agency, we can move more purposefully and intentionally in our environments. We can act in a way that feels authentic and in line with our true selves. And so I just feel that developing this awareness, and I love what you do in terms of nervous system regulation, because we can approach this from the UDL guidelines. And there are a lot of things that we can do in any type of learning environment, whether it is an online course, an in-person workshop, in a home setting, literally anywhere. But what the UDL guidelines don't call out are explicitly things like nervous system regulation, which directly align with the principle of engagement and universal design for learning, and things that you bring to the table and that you teach so skillfully, Tami.
Thank you. So one of the words that I like, and we've talked about this before, but so oftentimes when people have that like have had their voices silenced, they have difficulty speaking up and honoring themselves, but they also have difficulty finding joy within their own body and resiliency. And rather than looking, from the acts, like and finding that joy and resiliency from the inside out, rather than having it be like outside stimulus. So you
Yes.
talked a little bit about dopamine. So um,
Yeah. So, I mean, I would actually love, so especially for my audience who may not even be familiar with nervous system
oh,
regulation, would you mind giving a little bit of a synopsis for them what that looks like? So, what would that
oh,
look like to find it within yourself versus looking from external stimuli?
so when you're thinking about from the inside out, our nervous system governs everything within our body. And if you're not feeling like, I'm just going to use the word at home or befriending yourself, it's going to show up in a lot of different ways. It might show up in tight, rigid muscles, and it might show up in your neck as being tight and tense, which, and it can impact our breathing. And so when you begin to like do things that are going to regulate your nervous system through breath work, through gentle movements that speak to your body. And it's not a prescripted movement. It's done what does your body need? And oftentimes that's what I find to be the hardest piece of working with people, because they've been so used to doing movement in a prescripted way, to have the freedom to side bend, and maybe they want to incorporate an arm with it, but it's not what it looks like for me or what it looks like for you. So when people begin to find their own authentic voice, it increases their range of motion, their range of like autonomy, their range of agency or confidence, and how they can stand up, and they carry themselves actually very different too. The shoulders back and down rather than kind of rounded forward. And you might even see people who've been depressed, and when they start working with their nervous system, it really shows up in a lot of different ways. So to me, the nervous system work is the foundation of everything that I teach. And I teach a lot of courses. So using the nervous system as a way to empower people to find their own resiliency or their own joy. So that joy might be something as simple as going out and sitting with your feet in the grass, or maybe sitting down and playing with your pet, or going for a walk in the woods, or maybe going and doing a workout that you enjoy. I mean, there's a lot, or breathing, just breath work is so connected, but finding gratitude and small little things that for other, I mean, they're what it matters to us, like gratitude. Like I had a conversation yesterday with, her first name is Renee. And this morning, I gave gratitude to it because it was just such an empowering conversation that I had with her, that it made me feel very joyful this morning. And so I was like, and I keep an actual gratitude journal
I do
every
too.
day. Yeah, yeah. And it's so like when you can look back on it, and gratitude can be something different every single day. And it's finding um, just how many, there's Brene, or excuse me, Dr. or not Dr. Dana, oh my gosh, she writes Anchored. Dana, oh my gosh, Deb Dana is her
Oh,
name.
yes.
Sorry. Deb
Uh-huh.
Dana writes, and she talks a lot about the nervous system, but she uses one word that I really like, is she finding glimmers in your day that provide you like what makes it, and again, that's what makes it, brings you joy from the inside out. So it might be a glimmer of the sky's beautiful today and it's sunshiny, and or our we need rain. I mean, there's just so many things that we can find joy through the glimmers.
And
When
I would say that people who have been through trauma have a hard time finding those glimmers,
Oh, absolutely, 100%.
or people who
Yes.
are depressed, or
Yeah.
they're going through something difficult. And that's what I love. And I know that, we're listening on audio, but I'm showing a graphic of the UDL guidelines, which we will put in the show notes as well. But when we think about designing options for interests and identities, we are explicitly calling out, how do I help nurture joy and play? How do I help create that environment where people can find those small glimmers? And so, whether you are teaching in a classroom or in an online course, that might look like celebrating small wins. It might look like small movements being integrated, because in every aspect in the work that we do, there needs to be a sense of joy, or trying to at least invite that ability to nurture that joy and play.
Yeah. And I think even like when you think about like if a person has had their voice has been stifled, and they stand up and they set a boundary with somebody, and that's really hard for people who've gone through trauma, but that could be like joy for them. They might not feel it essentially right then, but to me, looking outward and seeing those kind of things, and it's like it takes time, it takes practice, and joy doesn't always come easy for people. um so
Yeah.
and play is another way, because I think adults, we forget how to play. And when you step back, and if you have children in your lives, you can find simple, joyful things with children. Laughing, whatever it may be. I have a young grandson, and all I did was hop side to side, and he was running by me, and the belly laughs that came out of him, and obviously it produced a whole lot of endorphins for me because it was just this back and forth exchange. But it's finding those little glimmers, and it was so spontaneous. So
Yeah. And, so for people who work in the education sector, the way that I see, where we kind of have, this maybe this little hiccup, like I can't invite joy and play. Like we have standardized testing, we
oh
have this
yeah.
curriculum to follow, we have to do all these things. Like there seems to be this dichotomy that learning has to be one thing, it has to be structured and organized and rigid, but play is very spontaneous and fun and lighthearted. And so sometimes it feels like in our environments, whether it is a course in the classroom or whatever it may look like, that we can't combine the two things, but there actually are a lot of opportunities to
There are.
invite play.
Yeah.
Having Play-Doh, having Chanel straws or pipe cleaners, and having people create something or craft something or playing a game instead of just direct learning, but inviting a little bit of friendly gaming in that environment are all ways to nurture joy.
Or dancing or singing,
Yes.
things that come spontaneous. And I mean, there's multitude of things in a classroom, and young, and especially like, let's just say second grade down, that teachers can incorporate those kinds of things that help with understanding. I don't know, singing their phone numbers or singing out loud. But and again, it goes back to the vocal tone. It's called vagal toning, and so it's like using our voice and using the voice to project. Singing in the car can be one of the most cathartic things that we can do for ourselves.
Yes. And
And
I
breath
love,
work.
yeah, how you bring up like things like humming and singing, which activates that vagus,
Yes,
right? Which brings that sense
correct.
of calm and safety.
Yeah, yeah. And when you first start like humming, um, there's like a bee sound where you buzz, and so it's reverberating in the back of your neck. Dr. Peter Levine, who's done a ton of research, he uses the letter sound V, and it's just vum, and then again it resonates in the back of the throat. So, and people have to find what works best for them, or maybe you practice yoga and an Om sound is really good. Um, it's it's just it's a way of, the voice can be a very, very powerful tool on so many different levels.
Right, right. And I love how you even bring like singing things in the classroom, such easy ways to integrate these ideas in very simple ways. So you don't have to go outside of your body, you can go within.
Yes. And again, everybody's body is going to be like, for what you do for yourself. Let's just say you and I, we're going to do things that speak to our body. So maybe the Om sound doesn't sound good to you, but it does to me. So this nervous system work is very individualized. It's not something that we can prescribe. It's something that has to be felt from within to help generate those those endorphins that feel good in our bodies, that produce a smile on your face, that produce a twinkle in your eye, that produce just that upward movement. And so opening your chest to breathe more deeply. So,
Yeah. And I really love how this is really focused on the internal landscape because a lot of times we are looking for answers outside of ourselves.
yes,
And yes, the design of the environment, it's absolutely critical to attend to those things. But when we attend to the design, that also means creating opportunities, very clear opportunities for people to tune into themselves,
yes,
right?
yeah.
It's creating the space for that to happen, regardless of what learning environment we're in.
Yeah. So would you say, like in a classroom, for example, let's just keep it at second grade, like we were talking about, like having a variety of different materials for children to sit on, so they have choices whether they're going to sit in a straight back chair, maybe they're going to have pillows, maybe they're going to have a ball or a wobbly chair that help them they're going to pick what that's their body's best in the learning environment. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that the one key distinction is that not using those tools as rewards. Because sometimes I see that as happen. You get to sit on this chair or this cushion or this, use this device if you've been good, as opposed to taking a step back and saying that is the precursor to a regulated nervous system.
correct.
For the behavior we are looking for.
Yeah. And I think too, it's like, especially like in many areas right now, like school has just started, and it's like a child comes into a brand new school and they don't feel safe. What can we do to help that child begin to feel safe? Maybe they have a buddy that helps them walk to the bathroom, or they bring something from home that's a little bit like tangible thing, like a stuffed animal or a picture of their family that helps them to feel like safe in the building, because they've gone from, like, let's just say childcare to a bigger school. So
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Creating all of those small moments for safety. And I know, Tami, you work with a lot of children as well and their home environments. And you talk
yes.
about that sense of safety in the adult's nervous system as
Oh,
a
it has to,
way. Yeah.
yeah. It has to start with the parents first, because if the parents are dysregulated, there is no doubt that your child is going to be dysregulated. And when you think about like what we've just come through with COVID, there's so many people are dysregulated right now. And that's why I feel on a few different levels why the nervous system work is it's just so important. Um, it's like having an understanding of how that, even how the pandemic affected us, and then thinking about our children. They lost that lack of, for many they lost that, or whether even if they're in high school, how they lost that lack of socialization, how they lost that lack of communication with their friends or the friendships. I mean, I had a conversation yesterday, and the young lady said, I lost the last 2 years of my high school, and now she's re-entering into college. And yet there's just so many indicators for me that she didn't feel safe going into that learning environment. So, because if you don't feel safe in the learning environment, you can't learn.
No, no, you can't. And one of the things in UDL I often talk about is that emotion and cognition are so intertwined, you
Yeah.
can't separate the two. We are emotional beings. And if we are not addressing our emotional needs, then nothing else matters. It
Yeah.
is so hard to focus on any cognitive task, whether this is the classroom, an adult learning environment, whatever this may be, unless your basic emotional needs for safety are met.
Yeah. And I think it's when you talk about those kinds of things, like just the fact, like if we're talking about us ourselves and we don't feel safe, we can't focus, we can't concentrate. It takes away our creativity becomes stifled.
Oh,
And there's like
absolutely.
in work performance definitely has like if you have a dysregulated nervous system, it can decrease your work performance as well. So
Yeah. So the research shows that, and again, I'm going to pull up these UDL guidelines, which we
please
will
do.
put in the
Yeah.
show notes. But when there has been trauma, when your emotional capacity has been stifled here, and you'll notice this brain right here that's highlighted in green, when that area has been so impacted by trauma, by whatever you're experiencing, that has a direct impact on these blue guidelines, this what we call the strategic network. And exactly what you're mentioning, Tami, your ability to act purposefully on the world, to plan, to organize. It's like that part of the brain comes offline because the emotional part is overtaking that part of the brain.
Yeah.
Right. And so finding this sense of calm, this sense of safety. And I love how you brought up COVID. Well, not that I love COVID, but
No.
because we are wired for belonging, we are wired for connection. And that is what COVID took away from us, for many of us.
Yeah.
And so we're
And
walking into environments where people are dysregulated, even though this was a few years ago now, we're still trying to play catch up because that sense of safety and belonging was stripped of us during that time.
Yeah. And I think that's really important. But I also just want to point, I actually attended a conference a few weeks ago and I listened to Dr. Amy Bantham, and she writes a book called Move Like, it says, Move to Live More. So in the book, she talks specifically about the impacts of how COVID like restricted our movements, restricted like so many things, like it restricted our physical movements, is what I should say, and how that had a bearing on like children's learnings, because we all know that children need to move, and if you're restricted in front of a computer screen, you can't move your body like you would in school and go outside and play recess and do all kinds of things like that. So there's a lot of new data that's coming out to support um, movement specifically, and it's so important for all of us.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yes. Movement is huge. And I'm not remembering the name, but there is a lot of research behind how are we integrating, and you know this, movement intentionally. I think the book is called Spark, if I'm not mistaken, if people want to look into it, about the importance of integrating movement. And yes, it's called Spark by John J. Rady, who's an MD, who really addresses this idea and how do you integrate movement intentionally with purpose in schools as well, when it's often the first thing that's being taken away when there is a loss of funding.
Yeah. And I think, and that's the same thing that Dr. Amy Bantham talks about. So she is, her title, like she's got PhD in like exercise science and kinesiology and all these different things, but she talks about minimum of 60 minutes a day for children, 60 minutes. And when you think about like she told a little story about a child who wore like just like he tracked his steps, and this little boy was, let's just say, around 8, and she said the normal 8-year-old little boy had between 12 and 16,000 steps a day, and all he was averaging was 4,000 steps a day because they had reduced and taken away one of the recess sessions in his school. So I just thought it was really interesting. So when you think about connecting movement with our brain and why it's so important, I mean, we're wired to move, and having that finding ways that are of interest to people to move, ways to move their body. So
And I just I just ran across a really incredible tool. You may be familiar with it, and we'll also drop a link in the show notes that is really helpful to help when a child is not able to move on their own, or they need to have some sort of device to help move them. It's a vibration plate. It's a whole body vibration plate. Have you heard of these?
oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen them used more for adults versus children. So I would be interested to see what it had to say too. But yeah, I
And
mean,
so they're used for exercise.
yeah,
But the research that I'm reading is that it can also really help support. I mean, what it's doing is it's stimulating the nervous system with that shaking, that gentle shaking, that it does the shaking for you, right? Or I've brought up, like, I know in our discussions privately, I've talked about a device called the Sensate, which we'll also link in the show notes, where you put it on your chest and the vibrations activate your vagus nerve, activate that central nervous system to create a sense of calm and safety. Because not everybody can enter into meditation or do the breath work or do the things from the beginning. So it's finding body-based approaches, or finding tools
and
to support that.
when you also think about like those two things that you just talked about, if somebody doesn't have, like, let's just say maybe an adult has recently had a hip replacement, and so getting out and walking is not going to be conducive, but they can stand on a vibration plate, or maybe they stand with their walker in front of them that's stabilizing them, depending on what their balance is like. I mean, I feel like there's other ways I mean, I'm not saying that breath work and exercise are not important, but it's looking at, again, designing for all people, right, Kasia?
Right. Yes,
Yeah,
variability
yeah,
is the norm, not the
yeah,
exception. And that
yeah.
goes with nervous system regulation. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
it's finding what works for you. Is it breath work? Is it a vibration plate? Is it the sensate? Is it, any number of these tools? Is it, side bending? There's millions of different tools you can use to approach things from the body as opposed to trying to intellectualizing out of something.
Well, exactly. But when you're trying to intellectually like reason with things, that's not doing like that's taking you outside of yourself. But when you begin to feel the emotion or feel where like that let's just say where the emotion is at in your body and trying to rationalize it cognitively, you're not doing nervous system work. You have to like it comes to a point where it's like just sitting and just being with yourself. And so oftentimes it's that stillness that people have a really hard time with.
Mm-hmm.
But when you can begin to like use those tools that we just talked about, it can help regulate as well. So,
Yeah.
but
And I
yeah,
love that because, we've been talking about learning environments, home environments, and, you pick and choose. Maybe that's what you do at home before your kid goes to school, or
yeah,
maybe that's part of your home environment routine. But there's just a number of different ways to think about. And I love this idea of variability. What works for you is not going to work for everybody else. Having choices so you can have a sense of agency. And that's what UDL is all about. It's thinking about everybody. What is predictable is that everybody is variable. Now, how do I design options so that people can find their own authentic self, their own sense of agency to show up, to be able to show up in the world that best represents them and how they want to be.
I love what you just said, how it best represents them because we don't I don't even want to talk about social media, but that is just so critically important of we're addressing all different body types and sizes and all those kinds of things. So thank you for bringing that piece up. That's really important. So yeah, Kasia, this conversation has been so rich today. Thank you so much for helping segue the UDL design and the nervous system work. It's been a great conversation today. So thank you so much for joining me. So,
Thank you.
and we
This was
will
wonderful.
have, yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. So,
Oh, I
yeah.
just said this was
So,
wonderful. Thank you.
yeah. So what I was going to say is for our listeners is we will have show notes with all of the things that we've talked about with links in the bottom. And we will also have information about how you can reach Kasia and the work that she does, which I'm just going to say is amazing from a curriculum design standpoint. And I've used it on so many different levels for my own teaching. So thank you, Kasia, for bringing the work that you do into the world. And I really appreciate it. So
Oh, well,
thank you.
thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. It's my lifelong mission to educate and bring awareness to the fitness industry around trauma-informed movement. If you have any questions or subject that you would like to hear addressed, reach out to me at my website at www.studiotpilates.com. Hit that subscribe button so the next time we release our latest episode, you're going to be notified. You can also reach out to me on Facebook at Tami Lysher. On Instagram, you can also reach out to me at Tami Lysher, but also Studio T Pilates MI. Thank you for listening to today's episode, and we'll talk to you next time.